On a 19th century portrait card, two young girls stand in matching dresses. The advertising around such portraits turned their bodies into a spectacle. The legal file tells a darker story. Millie-Christine McKoy were born to enslaved parents in North Carolina in 1851. At 10 months old, they were sold for $1,000. The agreement did not merely transfer children. It reserved part of the money earned by exhibiting them for the man who had enslaved their family. Emancipation did not immediately end that control. In 1865, their parents asked the Freedmen's Bureau to help bring them home. The case produced letters, contracts, a hearing, an arrest, and then a reversal. Yet the archive also holds evidence of education, international performance, family property, and a will in their own chosen name. Who controlled Millie-Christine's body, labor, earnings, and legal identity, and how much of that control did they later reclaim? Welcome to History Case Files. The record answers slowly. The portrait card offers no verdict. It presents Millie-Christine in formal clothing, posed for a paying public. A card like this could travel farther than either of them could. It could be sold, collected, pasted into an album, or used to advertise the next appearance. For the people purchasing it, the card was a souvenir. For Millie-Christine, portraits, posters, and newspaper notices were part of the machinery that turned a life into income for others. Their names require care. Historical records call them Millie and Christine, Millie-Christine, McKoy, McKoy, Mill-Christine, and other variants. Advertisers added labels designed to attract customers. Some of those labels were racist, degrading, or medically misleading. They are evidence of a commercial system, not names this narration will adopt. The North Carolina State Archives describes Millie-Christine as people who often presented themselves as a unified individual. That does not authorize a narrator to settle a question that belonged to them. Their records include plural descriptions because two sisters lived and performed together. Their later will, however, uses the name Millie-Christine McKoy and the singular pronoun I. Those choices matter because they come from a document connected to their own property and heirs. This case is not solved by deciding whether outsiders should count one person or two. The archive shows a shared physical life, separate names in some records, and a public identity they shaped over time. The hyphen in Millie-Christine is therefore more than punctuation. It signals an identity that promoters tried to package, doctors tried to define, and legal paperwork often failed to handle with care. The photograph also establishes a second problem. It is easy to encounter a 19th century portrait online with a sensational caption and assume the caption explains the person. It rarely does. A portrait may tell us how they dressed, how an operator framed them, and what a market wanted to sell. It cannot tell us who controlled the contract, who received the payment, or whether the sitter had a meaningful choice. Those answers sit elsewhere, in a deed book, an advertising broadside, a letter, a federal bureau file, a census, and a will. Together, they trace a long argument over custody and labor. The portrait opens the file. The sale agreement reveals where the argument began. The archive does not require us to choose a label that the record cannot sustain. It requires us to follow the names, pronouns, contracts, and signatures that Millie-Christine left behind, then admit where the record cannot fully speak for them with certainty. Millie-Christine were born in Columbus County, North Carolina, in 1851. Their parents, Jacob and Monimia McKoy, were enslaved by Jabez McKoy, a white blacksmith. The fact that the family shared a surname must not confuse the relationship. Under slavery, the law treated Jacob, Monimia, and their children as property controlled by another person. Family ties did not create legal protection against sale or separation. In 1852, when Millie-Christine were 10 months old, Jabez McKoy sold them to John C. Purvis of South Carolina for $1,000. The surviving deed terms make this more disturbing than a single price. Jabez McKoy kept the right to 1/4 of the proceeds from exhibiting them. The agreement also addressed what would happen if they were sold again and stated that their mother could travel with them under specified terms. In 1853, Jabez McKoy gave up his remaining share of exhibition income for another $200. These figures should not be converted into a modern headline. The essential evidence is already clear. A child's sale was written as a financial agreement. The document separated ownership, future income, resale terms, and a mother's access to her children into clauses that could be traded among adults. Millie-Christine did not enter entertainment as young performers making a career decision. Their commercial value was established through enslavement. The language of the period can hide this fact. Later publicity often made their early life sound like the opening chapter of a remarkable show business career. But the first business arrangement was not a theater booking. It was the sale of 2 infants whose parents had no recognized power to refuse the terms. When modern summaries jump straight to posters, European audiences, and royal appearances, the legal origin of the story disappears. Early records do not provide a complete minute-by-minute account of every transfer. They do show that Millie-Christine were separated from Jacob and Monimia and exhibited from town to town. Their family had no stable authority over where they went, who handled the earnings, or who decided the terms of their public presentation. The gap between a family relationship and a legal right was built into slavery itself. There is a second reason to remain exact. The deed refers to people through the vocabulary of property law. Repeating that vocabulary without context can make the transaction sound ordinary. It was not ordinary. It was a contract built around the sale and exhibition of children. The amount, the share of proceeds, and the later payment are not colorful details. They are the documentary proof that control over their bodies and labor began before they could consent to either. The sale agreement also shows how family relationships were made conditional under slavery. A mother's possible travel with her children was not presented as a right. It was an allowance written by the seller, subject to terms he controlled. The later promise that she would be returned if a resale occurred uses the same logic. The document did not recognize Jacob and Monimia as parents with authority. It treated their connection to Millie-Christine as something another man could permit, price, or withdraw. That is why the deed is central evidence, not merely a background document. It names the system in action at that moment. The stage came later. First came a purchase. First came an adult calculation that a visible difference could generate income. That calculation made Millie-Christine vulnerable to a new chain of managers, exhibitors, advertisers, and claimants. The record becomes less settled after the sale, but it never stops recording who expected to profit from them. The early root of Millie-Christine's life is surrounded by competing accounts. That uncertainty matters. Some later stories describe an abduction, a recovery, or a dramatic rescue. Other documents describe purchase, transfer, management, or disputed custody. These versions cannot simply be blended into one cinematic sequence. Each was produced by someone with an interest, a manager seeking publicity, a family defending a claim, a newspaper selling a story, or a later writer trying to make sense of incomplete records. The North Carolina collection preserves a letter from 1855 broadsides and papers connected to W.J.L. Miller, a theatrical manager. The collection's finding aid says Miller claimed to have found Millie-Christine in Boston, purchased them from a woman, exhibited them in Canada, and sailed for Liverpool. It also says that, according to Miller, they were taken from him in Scotland in 1857. The crucial phrase is according to Miller. His account was part of the business record of a man who exhibited them. It cannot be treated as a neutral eyewitness history. What the archive does establish is movement across a large commercial circuit. North Carolina appears at the beginning. Boston and Canada appear in the manager's account. Liverpool, Scotland, and later American cities appear in surviving notices and collection records. These routes were not evidence of free travel in the ordinary sense. During childhood, adults controlled the tickets, venues, contracts, and returns from the public appearances. Europe added prestige to the advertisements. A manager could use a foreign tour to suggest rarity, sophistication, and high demand. Audiences could be told that a local ticket offered access to people already admired abroad. That claim sold seats, but it did not answer whether Millie-Christine could leave, choose a manager, keep their earnings, or return to their parents. The records also reveal a recurring pattern. Every new claim of possession could be framed as protection, investment, education, or proper management. The language changed, but the question stayed the same. Who had the authority to decide where Millie-Christine went and who received the money? That is why the word ownership appears so often in 19th century accounts. It describes a system that did not recognize their childhood autonomy. By the middle of the decade, posters were advertising Millie-Christine to audiences far from Columbus County. The records of these tours give places and promoters, but they do not provide reliable access to private feelings. A responsible history cannot fill that silence with invented fear, gratitude, or rebellion. The documented fact is severe enough. Their separation from family became part of an international entertainment economy. The documents also show why place names alone cannot tell a freedom story. A tour can be recorded as Liverpool, Dundee, Edinburgh, Newcastle, New York, or Cincinnati. A poster can list a theater, a hotel, a date, and an admission price. None of those details identifies the person who chose the route or held the receipts. In the McKoy file, movement is evidence of a commercial network before it is evidence of opportunity. The same journey can mean recognition to an audience and continued dependence to a performer whose legal position remains unresolved. That distinction prevents a foreign tour from becoming an automatic symbol of liberation. It also identifies the missing evidence a documentary must not invent: consent, custody, and payment for each recorded trip abroad. The next records show how that economy operated. It required cards, posters, medical claims, ticket sales, interviews, and examinations. It turned the body into the advertised product, then presented that product as proof of a promoter's right to speak for the people on stage. 19th century museums, sideshows, and circuses did not all operate in the same way, but they shared an economic logic. Promoters charged audiences to see performers, curiosities, trained animals, lectures, and displays. The label placed on a person could determine how they were advertised, where they performed, and how much a manager believed an audience would pay. For black performers, opportunities were narrowed further by racism and by a market that rewarded caricature, exotic labels, and spectacle. Millie-Christine's childhood was shaped by that market. The North Carolina finding aid records that they were often forced to be examined without clothing before large crowds. This detail should not become a visual attraction in another documentary. Its historical importance is legal and economic. It shows that public access to their bodies was treated as something managers could arrange for profit. Medical language amplified the business. Broadsides quoted physicians and made claims about anatomy, nerves, and personhood. Such claims appeared beside ticket information and promotional copy. That placement is a warning? A medical statement printed on an advertisement was also a sales tool. It cannot be used as a final diagnosis, and it cannot erase the conditions under which the girls were examined. The publicity had another effect. It placed strangers in the position of deciding what Millie-Christine were. Were they a medical case, a novelty, a pair of sisters, a single public identity? The commercial answer changed according to what could draw a crowd. Their own later language offers a corrective, but it does not turn the earlier exploitation into a simple story of triumph. This distinction is essential. As children, Millie-Christine were displayed under arrangements made by adults who claimed legal and financial power over them. As adults, they performed music, singing, and public routines that required training and skill. Those later performances cannot be described as identical to the childhood exhibitions, nor can professional accomplishment retroactively make the earlier coercion acceptable. The archive therefore demands two truths at once. Millie-Christine became successful performers whose talent was recognized on an international stage. They also entered that stage through a system that had already sold them, separated them from family, and used invasive access to their bodies as an attraction. A trustworthy account must hold both truths without letting either cancel the other. The National Museum of African American History and Culture places this story within a broader history in which African American performers were often restricted to roles shaped by racial stereotypes or public display. That context explains why a successful engagement cannot be read as equality. A performer might develop technical ability, command an audience, and receive praise while still working in a market that decided which identities were profitable. Millie-Christine's advertisements operated inside that market. They made physical difference visible, attached it to a ticket, and then claimed authority through scientific or theatrical language. The record asks viewers to separate those sales claims from the people whose work made the sale possible. Their later success is more meaningful when it is not stripped of the unequal system they had to navigate in public and at work. The commercial system was about more than posters. It depended on contracts, guardians, managers, laws, transportation, and audiences willing to pay. When slavery ended, those mechanisms did not vanish. They moved into a new legal conflict over custody, labor, and the meaning of freedom. In October 1865, Jacob and Monimia McKoy appealed to the Freedmen's Bureau for help regaining custody of Millie-Christine. The Bureau had been created to assist formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction, but its existence did not guarantee a fair outcome. The McKoys had to carry their claim into an institution staffed by federal agents working within local law and under intense pressure from the same social order that had supported slavery. Mary A. Smith, identified by the Smithsonian as the last enslaver of the McKoy family, had control of Millie-Christine after the war. The museum says Smith refused to emancipate them and had separated them from their family for 8 years. It also says she coerced Jacob and Monimia into a contract requiring the girls to remain with her for 5 years, while promising their parents a share of performance profits. The contract offered money, but money was not the same as parental custody or personal freedom. Jacob and Monimia did not arrive at the Bureau without a plan. They presented a proposed agreement prepared with New York lawyers, Ladd and Cartwright. Their document required humane treatment, restricted handling by other people, appointed Nancy Hurley to travel and care for Millie-Christine, and called for regular payments. The terms reveal what the parents believed was at risk. They were trying to secure safety, supervision, contact, and money within a system that had already denied them all four. In November, Bureau officials ordered Smith to appear for trial with Millie-Christine. She arrived without them. Agents suspected that she intended to take them to Europe if the ruling went against her, and she was arrested. This moment is often told as the turning point, but the record does not support a rescue ending. An arrest did not automatically restore the family's control. Agent Clinton Silly first ruled that Millie-Christine should be returned to Jacob and Monimia. At the same time, he treated the agreement Smith had obtained as legally binding and placed limits on the McKoys' proposed contract. Silly stated that Jacob could appoint a guardian, oversee fair payments, and participate in revised arrangements. His decision acknowledged parental claims, yet it still placed the girl's future inside contract negotiations shaped by adults and state law. Days later, Silly reversed the order requiring their return. The Smithsonian's account says he concluded that the contract Jacob and Monimia had been coerced into signing was valid under North Carolina law. He added a provision requiring Smith to pay $5,000 if she failed to meet the contract's obligations. He also referred to Smith's role in teaching Millie-Christine to read and write. The reversal did not answer the central moral question. It showed how quickly a legal system could recognize a contract while failing to restore a family separated by slavery. Millie-Christine remained in Smith's custody and continued to perform. Jacob and Monimia appear again in Bureau records in 1866, still trying to regain custody. That continuation matters. The case was not a single hearing with a clean verdict. It was a struggle over legal language, money, guardianship, and a family's right to live together after emancipation. The Bureau had the authority to investigate, but its agents operated amid hostile local conditions and laws that could preserve unequal power under new names. The McKoy case exposes that limit in direct terms. Legal emancipation ended the formal institution of ownership. It did not automatically give Jacob and Monimia control over their daughter's work, movement, or income. It did not undo years of separation. It did not make every contract freely chosen. It also warns against treating federal intervention as a guarantee of justice. The Bureau created documents, heard claims, and issued orders. None of those actions alone shifted the balance of power permanently to the McKoy family. This is the core of the file. A circus poster can show what audiences were invited to see. The Bureau papers show what the family was trying to recover: custody, protection, and the ability to set terms for their own children. The next chapter must not erase that failure. It asks how Millie-Christine later developed skill, public authority, and material independence within a life that began under such control. The State Archive says Millie-Christine learned to read and write in at least 5 languages, played the piano, and toured widely while presenting their talents as well as themselves. This claim belongs to the archive's account and should remain attached to it. It does not describe a childhood free from coercion. It records skills developed under the management arrangements that continued after the Bureau dispute. As adults, Millie-Christine sang, danced, played music, received visitors, and appeared in performances that required more than silent display. The Smithsonian records that they performed for Queen Victoria and her family in 1871. This is evidence of international recognition, not proof that every part of their professional life was freely controlled. A royal audience did not cancel the unequal arrangements that had shaped their path to the stage. They also published a memoir or biographical account that presented their life to the public. Such a publication is valuable because it preserves how Millie-Christine were represented in their own era. It is not transparent evidence of complete authorship. Entertainment memoirs were produced for readers, managers, and ticket buyers, as well as for the people named on the cover. The right question is not whether the book is wholly authentic or wholly false. The question is what it can establish, what commercial purpose it served, and which claims need support from other records. One brief statement associated with Millie-Christine carries particular weight. They describe themselves as feeling as but one person. The phrase does not settle every modern question about identity. It does establish that their self-description deserves more respect than a promoter's label or a stranger's diagnosis. Their adult career therefore requires a balanced verdict. They were not merely passive figures frozen inside a childhood poster. They trained, performed, traveled, earned public recognition, and left records connected to property and inheritance. But agency did not arrive all at once, and it did not erase coercion. Their later choices existed beside contracts and managers whose full terms are not always preserved. The most honest account leaves that tension intact. Millie-Christine's talent was real. Their public skill was real. Their ability to shape a name and leave a will was real. So were the limits imposed by slavery, racial spectacle, and post-war custody arrangements. The final documents show what endured after the stage lights and advertising bills disappeared. Their public work also changed the evidence available to us. Childhood advertisements usually speak through managers, physicians, and owners. Adult performance notices can still be commercial, but they record music, conversation, costumes, rehearsed routines, and public hosting. These details do not reveal every contract term. They do show that Millie-Christine's livelihood involved practiced work. A documentary should neither erase that work nor use it to disguise the conditions that first placed them before paying audiences. Each adult performance was more than display, but freedom under contracts is still unknown. Later records moved the case away from the ticket office and toward home, land, and inheritance. After the custody battle, Jacob McKoy bought the farm of the man who had enslaved him. The detail should not be treated as a simple triumphal ending. It does, however, mark a change that slavery had made nearly impossible. A formerly enslaved father acquiring property connected to the place where his family had been controlled. The federal census of 1870 records Jacob and Monimia McKoy with 7 children, excluding Millie-Christine. Jacob's will, written in 1888 and later probated, named Millie-Christine among his children. Estate papers show that Millie-Christine received 22 of his 78 acres, including Jacob's dwelling house. Land and a house did not erase the past, but they created a documented material stake in a family future. In September 1912, Millie-Christine made a will using the name Millie-Christine McKoy. The document referred to I, named a beloved sister as heir, and then directed property to nieces. This is the document at the center of the final verdict. It is not a poster written by a manager, a medical broadside, or a bureaucrat's description. It is a legal statement of property, kinship, and chosen grammatical identity. Official sources differ slightly on the dates of their deaths. The Smithsonian states that Millie died on October 8, 1912, and Christine followed about 12 hours later. The North Carolina Finding Aid gives October 9th and 10th. The source conflict means a careful narration should not quietly select one exact sequence. What both accounts support is that Millie-Christine died within roughly a day of each other in October 1912 in North Carolina. Their death closed a life that had been publicly marketed from infancy. Their will closes the file differently. It records not a ticket price, a physician's claim, or a manager's advertisement, but property left to family. That does not transform the whole story into one of total freedom. It does show that Millie-Christine left evidence of legal voice and family obligation in a form the archive can still read. Property did not make Millie-Christine independent, and the available papers cannot show financial arrangements from their touring years, but the final archive contains more than advertisements, family records, land records, probate papers, and a will. That change in documentary form matters. At the beginning, others used contracts to assign Millie-Christine a price. At the end, a legal document records Millie-Christine directing property toward relatives. The contrast does not cancel earlier violence. It gives the case a documented shift in authority. The facts are clear. Millie-Christine McKoy were born to enslaved parents in North Carolina, sold at 10 months old, exhibited in the United States and Europe, and caught in a custody dispute after emancipation. Their parents appealed to the Freedmen's Bureau. Smith was ordered to appear with them, arrived without them, and was arrested. Silly initially ordered their return, then reversed that order. Millie-Christine continued to perform, later held property, and made a will. The myth is that emancipation immediately reunited them with their parents and ended outside control over their work. The Bureau file proves otherwise. Freedom in law did not automatically produce custody, safety, control of income, or a freely chosen contract. The unknown remains substantial. The archive does not settle the exact sequence of every early transfer, claimed abduction, recovery, or management deal. It does not reveal how much income Millie-Christine controlled at each stage, or how much of their memoir was shaped by others. The final record is the will. Millie-Christine named property, heirs, and themselves. That is not the whole answer. It is the strongest evidence that the people once sold as children later asserted a legal voice of their own. Like, subscribe, and return.